Welcome to This Explainer, parents. Look, if you're watching this, you've probably noticed your child making these sudden, repetitive movements or sounds, right? And you are looking for answers. It can feel confusing, maybe isolating, and honestly, just a little overwhelming at times. But right off the bat, I want to say this. You are absolutely not alone. And you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're going to look way past what you just see on the surface, and we're stepping directly into the hidden sensory reality of your child's experience. Our goal is to give you a really warm, reassuring, and completely fresh perspective on childhood tics, one that's literally going to change how you view what your child is going through every single day.
Let's kick things off with a question that I think we can all relate to. Have you ever instinctively told your child to just stop a repetitive movement? Maybe they're constantly blinking, sniffing, or clearing their throat while you're just trying to sit and watch a movie together. And you've gently, or let's be real, maybe out of pure frustration, asked them to please just hold it in or settle down. Hey, it is a completely natural parental reaction. We have all been there. But by the end of our time together today, you might actually find yourself responding to those specific moments in a completely different, much more empathetic way.
Okay, let's dive right into section 1, the outer view, what you see. We'll start by validating exactly what you observe on the outside.
So, on the surface, tics are defined as sudden, rapid, and involuntary movements or vocalizations. This could be, a simple eye blink, a facial grimace, a quick shoulder shrug, or vocal things like repetitive throat clearing, humming, or even repeating certain words out of nowhere. Medically speaking, these usually start around age 5 or 6, and they actually tend to peak in severity right around those tween years, so between 10 and 12. But listen, the absolutely crucial word to remember here is involuntary. Your child is not doing this on purpose. They aren't trying to be disruptive, and they definitely aren't trying to annoy you.
Now, when we take a closer look at standard diagnostic tools like the symptom checklist, we start to uncover something pretty fascinating. Notice how it describes a subtle urge that's kind of difficult to describe, sometimes likened to an itch. Well, this hints at something entirely invisible happening right before the physical tic actually occurs. It tells us that what we see on the outside, that's really only half the story. Which brings us to our next section, the inner sensation, the invisible urge. We really need to shift our focus to what's happening on the inside.
And this brings us to a massively important concept, the premonitory urge. Basically, this is an incredibly uncomfortable sensory buildup, a tension, a heaviness, or an intense itch that happens right before a tic. Imagine for a second having a huge mosquito bite that you are utterly forbidden to scratch. Think about how that itch just consumes your thoughts, how the tension builds in your body until it feels almost unbearable. The real game changer here is realizing that the tic itself is actually just the body's natural way of releasing this crazy internal pressure. The physical movement isn't the problem for the child. The tic is the relief.
Believe it or not, medical professionals actually measure this internal tension using tools like the Peutz scale. That stands for the Premonitory Urge for Tics scale. When you read the specific feelings kids are asked to rate, man, it really hits home. They're asked if they agree with statements like, I feel pressure inside my brain and body, or I feel like something isn't just right. I mean, just think about how heavy that is for a young kid to carry around all day. This is the silent, invisible battle your child is fighting before you ever even see a single blink or hear a single throat clear.
So how do we know what they're feeling? Let's move into our next section, giving the urge a voice, looking at Dr. Inyan Takan's incredible research.
Historically, there was a huge disconnect here. For a long time, the medical community assumed that young kids, children under 10, just lacked the cognitive maturity to feel or describe these complicated sensory urges. They thought early tics were just random physical spasms, no warning attached. But Dr. Takan's findings completely flipped the script. She proved that a staggering 90% of 6 to 10-year-olds absolutely can recognize and report these intense internal pressures when we just give them the chance to use their own words. And honestly, this is so deeply empowering for us as parents because it means you don't have to guess anymore. Your child actually has the capacity to talk with you about what they're feeling inside.
To really wrap our heads around this, let's look at section 4, the bubbling grapes metaphor. We don't need a medical textbook for this, just a child's perspective.
Listen to how a 9-year-old girl in Dr. Takan's study brilliantly described her own premonitory urge. She said, it's like having grapes in a container with a lid. The grapes are like the feeling trying to bubble through. I really want you to picture that. Imagine this intense, physical, bubbling pressure building up inside your child's body or mind, just expanding, rising, and desperately trying to get out. The 9-year-old goes on to say, the lid is like the tic.
I try to keep it in, but it keeps bubbling. Just think about how incredibly uncomfortable and completely exhausting it is for them to suppress this. Imagine the physical toll it takes to just force that lid down while the pressure is rising. Holding that lid takes immense mental and physical energy away from literally everything else they're trying to do, whether that's focusing on math class, listening to your instructions, or just trying to play with their friends. And finally, she says, until the lid comes off and the grapes seep out. That physical movement you see, the eye roll, the sudden vocal sound, the tick itself, is simply the lid popping off that container. It is a sudden release. It's literally the only way they can relieve that unbearable sensory pressure. So what you should take away from this is profound, and it honestly requires a total shift in how we look at this. The invisible premonitory urge is often way more distressing, annoying, and even painful to the child than the physical tick itself. Let that sink in for a second. The real battle isn't that external physical movement catching your eye. It's the internal, invisible distress your child is bravely fighting on the inside all day long. Armed with this new perspective of the bubbling container, let's move to our next section, empathetic home support strategies, and see how we can practically help them out. First and foremost, you can let yourself off the hook a bit here. Breathe a sigh of relief. The data shows us that tics naturally wax and wane. That means they're going to come and go, peak and valley entirely on their own. In fact, simple tics often need absolutely no medical treatment whatsoever. Plus, studies show that for about 50% of children, tics resolve entirely by the time they hit 18. Reassuring your child and, reassuring yourself that this is normal and manageable is the absolute foundation of your support. It's also super vital to recognize that your child's environment directly impacts the pressure inside that container. Things like stress, anxiety, physical fatigue, and especially excessive screen time can all act like a stove, basically turning up the heat on those bubbling grapes. And here is something that really surprises parents. High positive excitement acts as a trigger too. A highly anticipated birthday party or an upcoming holiday creates the state of physiological arousal in the body that rapidly builds up that internal sensory pressure, which leads to more tics. So let's build this into a daily action plan. Number 1, based on everything we now know, avoid telling your child to just stop. Asking them to stop is just forcing them to manually hold down the lid, which only builds more agonizing pressure until it inevitably explodes, right? Instead, step 2, recognize and manage those environmental triggers we just talked about. And 3, foster a relaxing environment where they feel safe, supported, and unjudged. This might look like giving them a quiet, dimly lit space in their bedroom for 20 minutes after school. No screens, no pressure to talk, just a safe place to completely decompress and let the lid off. Finally, let's look at our last section, partnering with your school. We really need to extend this empathy-driven support outward. Look, you are your child's absolute best advocate. Inform their teachers about the diagnosis and directly explain this concept of premonitory urges to them. Teachers often mistakenly assume the constant fidgeting caused by these urges is a sign of bad behavior or lack of focus, right? So advocate for scheduled, subtle breaks during the day. For example, you could set up a simple hand signal your child can give the teacher to just step out into the hallway or go to the restroom for 5 minutes when they feel that pressure getting too high. And definitely share resources from organizations like Tourette's Action to help educators understand what's really happening under the surface. We've covered a lot of ground today, peering beneath the surface of what tics really are and what they mean for the amazing kids who experience them. So I want to leave you with this final thought. Knowing your child is constantly battling this invisible, exhausting, bubbling pressure, how will understanding those bubbling grapes change your reaction the very next time you see them tic? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer and for taking the time to truly understand your child's world.